Analyst, Emery Simon. He's counselor to the Business Software Alliance. He advises BSA and its member companies on a broad range of domestic and international policy issues, including intellectual property, technology policy, trade, and security. BSA's members include the leading American software and computer companies in the business of developing creative software solutions for the workplace, school, and home. Previously, Mr. Simon was the executive director of the Alliance to Promote Software Innovation and was deputy assistant USTR for intellectual property at USTR, where he was the principal U.S. negotiator on intellectual property. Emery?
Great, thank you, Christy. So since Alan said we have to do three things in threes, let me try to do that. So one, I'll give you...
Fail.
Well, I'm trying
You'll
to
succeed.
I'm trying to succeed. So one, I want to sort of put TPP in context, or at least the context that I think about it and technology companies think about it. Two, I want to talk a little bit about what makes it interesting and what makes it important. And three, I want to talk about going forward and how TPP could be enormously helpful, but there's a lot more work to be done. So in context, trade negotiators have two sets of potential goals in their jobs. One is to remove existing barriers, and the other one is to anticipate potential barriers. Trade negotiators mostly get rewarded for removing barriers. They don't often get rewarded for anticipating barriers and trying to create disciplines to take those on. I think TPP does both, which is why it's an important step forward. And I think it's an important step forward in terms of how we think about trade and trade policy. Secondly, what is a market access barrier? I mean, I think that's a really important question to ask ourselves. So in the 1940s and 50s, a market access barrier was a tariff or a quota. Over time, we have expanded that list of what can constitute a market access barrier. In the 80s, for example, we looked to add intellectual property, services, and investment to trade disciplines because we felt that those were areas where market access barriers could arise. As we look today of what is a market access barrier, one of the important things that TPP does is it yet again expands a definition in a way that makes sense for the 21st century. And the details of what is in the agreement, the details are important and they're valuable, but I think the conceptual framework that it creates of how we're going to think about where comparative advantage is and where economic benefits are going forward, and this is sort of the thing that Senator Wyden was ahead of his time on. Sometimes that's a problem, sometimes a good thing. But we've expanded the concept of what constitutes a market access barrier, and what we've included, and I'll just mention some of the things that are not often highlighted within the context of when we talk about TPP. Encryption issues, which are a hot issue right now for certainly our companies, our industry. Within the US context, TPP actually has some provisions on using or imposing restrictions on what kind of encryption can be used. It'll be interesting to see whether the US can live up to its obligations depending on what Congress decides to do in that space. State-owned enterprises. State-owned enterprises are specifically addressed. This is a good thing. For many of our companies, SOEs are huge customers, and they sort of walk this line between being private and public, pretending whichever most suits their needs. So that helps a lot. There are source code provisions. One of the issues for the software industry is mandatory transfer of source code, which then enables cloning and all kinds of mischief with the innovations that we do. And I think it's important that TPP has some provisions on source code transfers. There are things that we worry about all the time. So governments use software without licenses, traditional piracy kind of concept, and TPP deals with that as well. And then I won't go through the there are procurement provisions, there are lots of provisions which are important as we see technology and particularly software industries going forward. Now for the third part, be a little kind of forward-looking and maybe be a little provocative. Alan mentioned the Privacy Shield Safe Harbor. Potentially, what Europe is now doing on privacy is maybe the biggest trade barrier we've seen in a very, very long time. It's a market access issue. It is being discussed exclusively or primarily as an issue of privacy. And privacy in the European context is a human right, which I have no quarrel with whatsoever. But we also know that legitimate domestic policies can sometimes be turned into disguised restrictions on trade. And I find it curious, for example, that European data processing authorities have done investigations of a number of companies of their practices in compliance with European law. I don't believe any one of those companies has been anything but an American company. There's data processing that occurs in Japan and India and a whole bunch of places. At some point you got to sort of ask the question, is this a market access barrier or not? In that context, does the TPP obligations help? The answer is yes. Will the Europeans agree to put something like that into other international agreements that they are part of? I don't think so right now. It's a real challenge. And at least from the perspective of the companies that I work with, I represent, whether TISA or TTIP or any other agreement comes back, one of the ways that we will measure it is how it does on these market access barriers that affect data flows. And if they are incomplete, if they are less than what TPP did on data flows, it's going to be a real challenge for us to stand up and cheer. So I'll stop there.